For years I'd wanted to brew my own beer, but I was discouraged after watching tutorials and guides online because they typically involved an extensive list of expensive equipment and produced substantial amounts of beer, usually between 25 to 30 litres per batch. As a beginner, investing hundreds of pounds in equipment and ingredients was daunting, especially having never brewed before. The idea of handling such a huge volume of liquid was overwhelming, not to mention the significant amount of fridge storage space it would require. I was also aware of the learning curve and the potential for mistakes, and quite honestly, the prospect of ending up with 30 litres of undrinkable beer just wasn't motivating. Starting small made a lot of sense for me, allowing me room for experimentation and learning without the pressure of managing and storing gallons of beer. This approach also offered flexibility to experiment with different ingredients, and I've made lagers, ales, pumpkin ales, and even elderflower and nettle beer using my small setup. The brew in a bag recipe and process that I'll be sharing with you in this video produces about 5 litres of beer, and you'll only need to purchase a few items and ingredients to start brewing. And the reason that we're using the brew in a bag method is because it simplifies the brewing process by combining mashing and boiling in one pot. So let's get started. Equipment wise, you'll need one 5-litre glass demijohn with a bung and airlock, a brew bag for the malt, a couple of small muslin bags for the hops, a large stock pot with a lid. Ours is 11 litres, which is a great size for working and brewing. A siphon is optional but highly recommended. You'll also need a thermometer, and if you have a meat thermometer, it will work just fine. I'd also recommend having a funnel and one large and one small colander. I've placed links in the description to all the items you'll need, but hopefully you've got most of these items in your kitchen already. As for the ingredients, you'll need crushed lager malt, hops and lager yeast. Brewing sugar is optional. Buying your physical equipment from Amazon does make sense because you can get some really good deals, but the brewing ingredients are extremely expensive on Amazon. So we regularly purchase our malt, yeast and hops from the brew shop in the UK. Their prices are very competitive and the quality of their products is excellent, but do shop around to get the best possible prices. But that's enough talk, let's get brewing. Start by purifying 6 litres of water. We use a Lark water filter to remove as many contaminants and chlorine as possible. Purification is a very important step to removing chlorine that can affect the taste of your beer. I always start by putting a small colander at the bottom of the stock pot to potentially prevent the malt from burning. Fit the brew bag securely around the pot, add the water and heat it to 75 degrees centigrade. Keep the lid on to prevent evaporation because the more water you lose here, the less beer you'll end up with. When the water reaches 75 degrees centigrade, it's time to add 1 kilogram of Pilsner malt. Put it into the brew bag and give it a good mix to ensure even coverage and that there are no clumps. We use an induction oven plate, which is actually quite handy because it helps to keep the temperature very constant. So our setup maintains a very steady 65 degrees centigrade once we've added the malt to the 75 degrees centigrade water, which is perfect for mashing. If you do have a thermometer, monitor the temperature and try to keep it at 65 degrees centigrade. After mashing for 60 minutes at 65 degrees, raise the grain temperature to 75 degrees centigrade for the next 20 minutes. This step is crucial for flavor development and for halting enzymatic processes, but do not let the water boil. Now it's time to remove the grain and press out the wort. Be very careful at this stage because the grain and the water are extremely hot. This is where I use my large colander to squeeze out as much of the goodness as I can from the bag back into the pot, being very careful not to burn myself. At this point the malt is done and we put ours on the compost heap. Next, boil the wort and keep it bubbling, keeping the lid on to prevent evaporation. Add 20 grams of SARS hops into a small muslin bag, and when the water is boiling, drop it in. Put the lid back on and let it boil for 45 minutes. Once the 45 minutes are up, add another bag with 10 grams of SARS hops for extra bitterness and let both bags boil for another 15 minutes for a total boil time of 60 minutes. While the water is boiling, thoroughly sterilize your demijohn, bung and airlock. I recommend a no-rinse sanitizer for convenience and effectiveness. After the water is finished boiling, carefully remove the hop bags. You now need to cool the water to about 10 degrees centigrade as quickly as possible. To do this, I fill our sink with cold water and place the pot into it, stirring the water to release heat. Once the water in the sink gets warm, empty it and refill it with cold water. You need to get the liquid down to around 10 degrees centigrade for ideal fermentation. Once cooled, pour the cold water into the demijohn using a funnel to prevent unnecessary spillage and mess. Pitch 5 grams, about half a packet of lager yeast into the cooled wort. If you add the yeast while the water is still too hot, it may kill the yeast and affect the fermentation. The ideal fermentation temperature will vary, so read the instructions on the yeast packet. Add water to the airlock, then fit the bung to the top of the demijohn. That's it! Phase 1 is done. Leave the demijohn in a cool, dark place. We leave ours in our annex kitchen where the temperature is around 17 to 18 degrees centigrade. Expect vigorous activity in the airlock for the first 24 to 48 hours as the yeast ferments the sugars. The gas escaping via the airlock is primarily carbon dioxide. The airlock also prevents air which might have contaminants like wild yeast and bacteria from entering into the demijohn. After 6 to 7 days, the fermentation will slow down, signaling the end of the primary fermentation process. When there's no more CO2 escaping, it's time to start bottling the beer. Carefully remove the bung and siphon the beer into a clean pot, leaving as much sediment behind in the demijohn as possible. The sediment really isn't very pleasant, so when you get to the bottom of the liquid in the demijohn, try not to collect any of it. Transfer the beer into bottles or a keg. For bottles, I recommend the flip-top style because they're inexpensive and create a tight seal. Add a pinch of sugar to each bottle before sealing. This gives the yeast a little bit of extra food to create carbon dioxide, carbonating the beer in the bottle and giving you that satisfying pop when you open the bottle. With the beer now in the bottles, place them in the fridge for at least 2 weeks. Bottle conditioning is crucial as it allows flavors to mature and mellow out, and it gives the beer its clean, crisp taste. After brewing and bottling, it's essential to clean and wash all of your equipment thoroughly. This post-brewing cleanup is crucial to maintain hygiene and ensure your equipment is ready for future use. Pay special attention to the demijohn and any other vessels that you've used, as residue can become a breeding ground for bacteria. After washing, sterilize the demijohn and other tools to remove any lingering microbes. When diving into the world of home brewing, keeping a detailed brewing log or journal can be incredibly valuable. As you work through every batch, make notes of every step and measurement. Documenting the types and quantities of ingredients as well as temperatures and timings helps you replicate successful flavor profiles for future batches. But don't stop at just replicating successes, because brewing is as much an art as it is a science, and there's always room for creativity. So don't be afraid to experiment with the levels of ingredients, especially hops and yeast, which can significantly influence the beer's flavor and aroma. Adjusting hop varieties and amounts can alter the bitterness, flavor, and aroma profiles, while experimenting with different yeast strains or quantities can impact the beer's body, alcohol content, and subtle flavor notes. The beer from this recipe is really crisp. It has a mild malt sweetness and a light bitterness from the Saaz hops. It's a refreshing, light-bodied beer with a clear golden color, providing a smooth and satisfying finish, which is far superior from any store-bought beer. So I hope that you have found this video useful and inspiring, and that it motivates you to brew your own beer. And the takeaway message is that great beer doesn't require complex equipment or brewing in vast quantities. It just requires passion, patience, and a bit of creativity. So go ahead, brew small, dream big, and cheers to the wonderful batches that you create.